to the Subnet Summit. We have our first non-DGen today with us from the Savvy DeFi team. So we'd like to welcome IDM. What I can say about this person is they have a background in social psychology, which is sort of a non-traditional space but we're all welcoming here. So happy to welcome him. Before we go, we have Alex in the back. Do you want Alex to join us?
Oh, hey, Alex. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for the warm welcome, and hey, Alex. Thanks for for joining along for this presentation. So, Alex is one of my compatriots over at Savvy. He has endless energy and super conscientious.
Great.
So I knew he would be here.
Great. Yeah, what's up, man? If your audio is a little funky, I mean, you just have to adjust your input sources, but should be all right.
Cool. Hey, Alex.
All right. Why don't you kick it off, IDM?
All right, thanks. Like I said, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for the warm welcome. I'm here to talk about something that has been really important for us to discuss around Savvy, and that's the question of fair launches. These are really cool these days, and we went really deep. We did a ton of research on fair launches, and we ended up actually really pushing the state of the art. So in this talk, I'm going to share some of that. So let me get right into it. I have an overview. So the name of this talk, actually, before I jump in, is actually about using agent-based modeling for fair launches, and specifically for the simulation of a liquidity bootstrapping pool. I'm going to explain what all that means in just a second. But first of all, okay, all about fair launches. Let's set up what exactly we're going to talk about. So first, we will discuss what is a fair launch, and the short version, the preview, is that it has to do with distributing protocol tokens at a fair price, whatever exactly that is. We'll talk about a liquidity generation event. That's part of a fair launch, potentially. We'll talk about liquidity bootstrapping pool, and then dive deeper on that. Planning a liquidity bootstrapping pool, how exactly you configure it, choose the parameters, and so on. And then some techniques for getting insight into how things might happen in the future. So we're going to talk about simulating with a spreadsheet. This is the common way. And then we're going to talk about the new stuff, simulating with agent-based modeling. Well, I'll describe the market, the agents, how that all works, running the simulations, and interpreting the results. So we have a lot to cover. Let's hop right in. So a little bit about myself. I am a social psychologist. My background is in crowds and contagion and behavioral economics and computational social simulations. So I found a very natural fit in crypto, in DeFi. Now, one of the things that I do is research in DeFi. And what I'll be talking about here is tokenomic simulations, economic simulations, writ large. But I also mess around with Discord bots and blockchain snapshots and sort of like chain analysis and basically whatever else is interesting, but especially if it's impossible. And so for this, what I'll be presenting here is all work I'm doing with Savvy DeFi. Relevant to this conference, Savvy will be coming to Avalanche in the near future. Some of the things I do at Savvy are specifically working on this launch, also helping with the DAO, helping with Discord. And it is a startup, and so we all wear many hats to actually make the magic happen. So let me get into the fair launch. As I said, it's going to distribute protocol tokens at a fair price. But let me set up some principles that maybe relate to what it is to be fair, so to speak. So this should include things like everybody gets the same terms. What that means, skipping ahead a little bit, is that whales and VCs would not be favored in this type of launch. That could be contrasted with other launches. The launch itself should be permissionless in the same way that that blockchains are generally sort of permissionless. The launch ought to be able to resist bots, shouldn't be able to be gamed. And part of the purpose is to achieve a final distribution of these tokens that is as even as possible. Knowing that wealth is not evenly distributed, nevertheless, we want to distribute these protocol tokens as easily as possible. One of the reasons for that would relate to representative governance. If we're going to use governance tokens, then we want a representative participation in that governance. So a fair launch is successful if it captures some of those principles. So now I want to zoom in specifically on the some of the ways that you kind of affect a fair launch. So this is liquidity generation and bootstrapping.
Got a question for you here. Teach.
By all means.
What is the fairest launch of all? In your opinion?
Yeah. So this is actually a very interesting question. There's a measurement that I'm going to talk about in a little bit called the Gini coefficient.
Yes, that's
and
right.
It ranges from 0 to 1. So the fairest might have a Gini coefficient of 0, meaning every single person gets exactly the same number of tokens. But there are some reasons why that might not actually be the way that you're going to operationalize what is fair. So we could say, kind of by like getting at it from the other direction, like what is most unfair. And a Gini coefficient of 1 would basically mean that one individual holds all the tokens and everybody else holds none. So, what is fair is definitely going to not look like the Gini coefficient of 1. It's not definitely going to look like the Gini coefficient of 0, where everybody has exactly equivalent representation. There are a couple of reasons why that might not actually be the fairest. Perhaps people have different stakes, and maybe it would actually be unfair to people with a larger stake for everyone to have exactly equal representation. So it really comes down in some ways to how you're going to apply it to a specific situation. But we do have ways to kind of quantify it, like how fair something is, how equitable something is, and Gini coefficient is one way. So I can show how that applies in with a real life fair launch. But so to actually do the fair launch, there are two main, call them events that make it happen. So the first one is known as a liquidity generation event. So this is think of it as an auction. It is a method to distribute these tokens. I'm just going to call this generic token. It's token. Okay. So you're gonna buy some allotments of these tokens even before the price is actually known, and then at the end of the event, you're just going to divide the total number of tokens to be distributed by the actual number of allotments that were purchased, and then you determine how many tokens each participant receives. And so everybody ends up paying the same price, more or less. There can be little modifiers on it, but in general, everybody pays about the same price per token. It's almost always a timed event. I usually see times between like 3 days all the way up to 2 weeks. And this means that at any point during this time, you can participate. And it's called a liquidity generation event. Maybe not super surprisingly, the purpose is to generate liquidity. And one of the things that this can do that's really attractive right now is that this could feed into this idea of protocol-owned liquidity, that the people participate and then the protocol uses the proceeds to establish protocol-owned liquidity. It's an interesting way to get that started.
Can you give our listeners a good example of protocol-owned liquidity? Are we talking Olympus DAO?
Well, so I mean, in the specific case that we're talking about with Savvy, what protocol-owned liquidity would be is we have a number of swaps of liquidity pools that need to have tokens in it from the start. And maybe those tokens will be AVAX, maybe there'll be a little bit of Bitcoin. And so the liquidity generation event translates directly into capitalizing these liquidity pools. So the capital that actually ends up in those pools has to come from somewhere, like the ETH or the AVAX. You cannot manifest that. You've got to swap for it. And so the purchaser ends up being the protocol itself. This is a mechanism for enabling the protocol to get that AVAX to capitalize the liquidity pools. And so no participant controls the contract at that point. It's actually the protocol that controls that portion of the liquidity. So there are a couple of different ways that you can tweak a liquidity generation event. It's possible to set a floor price. You can also do kind of like, you can gamify it a little bit. There can potentially be tiers where maybe there are different discounts or there's freedom here. There's not really exactly a single way to do it. But that's generally what a liquidity generation event is. So, but what I'm really going to talk a lot more about is a liquidity bootstrapping pool. And this is an idea, it really traces back to Balancer. And it's a specific swap contract that Balancer originally authored. And one of the purposes of it is to do this price finding function for a token. So when you do the liquidity generation event, you don't even know what price the token will end up at. And it ends up just being a simple division so that everybody pays the same price. But a bootstrapping pool can use a market kind of operation to actually find whatever the market price is for the token. So what Savvy is going to do, the liquidity generation event will come first, and then the bootstrapping pool will come second. And it will be the bootstrapping pool that actually figures out kind of what the market thinks this token is worth, more or less. And this contract is a lot like a constant product 50-50 liquidity pool in the Uniswap style. But Balancer permits more exotic pools, and these can be unbalanced. So that's especially attractive for launching a token, because you can make your pool 99% token, 1% USDC at the start, and actually then Balancer extended this contract so that the weights can change over the course of the event. So maybe it starts off 99% token, 1% USDC. And by the way, that enables you to put a teeny tiny amount of USDC into the pool and a substantial amount of token. And using a small amount of capital, you can bootstrap all this liquidity. So, okay, over the course of the bootstrapping pool, and again, this might take 3 days, the weight gradually changes from the starting weights to whatever the ending weights are. And what these numbers are is one of the parameters that is really important to configure. So I'm going to talk a lot about where these numbers come from. But when you do 99% token, 1% USDC, then the token ends up being like expensive, so to speak, in terms of USDC terms. And so like a small amount of USDC can actually capitalize this pool. So next, this has been done before. We're actually standing on the shoulders of giants. One of the really fun examples that we came across was the Byte Masons Oath fair launch. They built their own liquidity generation event platform. They used a Balancer fork called Beethoven X on Phantom to do the LBP. We spoke to them and asked a whole bunch of questions, and they were extremely helpful. Camelot launched on Arbitrum. They built their own LGE platform, and they're actually just really doing well on Arbitrum with this platform. They did not do an LBP. Like I say, there's not a one size fits all. You can customize these different components to the fair launch that you want to affect. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants. Also, there are many tools that already exist to help with this. As I said, Balancer has a contract out there. Beethoven X is a fork of Balancer. So the LBP contracts are out there. There are front ends that make it easy for people to participate. Fjord Foundry has one of the front ends. Avalanche is another front end that is on Avalanche. And it's a great group of people that we spoke to, and they answered a ton of questions for us, and they were great. When it comes to liquidity generation events, I point towards Camelot. They have a platform you could use, or just roll your own. This is something that Savvy looked into, and we made something that looked real nice, actually. So it doesn't have to be super hard, but well, I don't want to undersell it. It actually was a substantial lift, but nevertheless, Savvy did make it happen. But let's talk a little bit about planning, because, like I said, some of the numbers are pretty sensitive. So first of all, if you're going to launch, do you do the liquidity generation event? Do you do the bootstrapping pool? Do you do both? What are you going to use as your reserve or collateral token? Sometimes you use USDC. Sometimes it's a gas token like Phantom, AVAX, ETH, something like that. The quantity, how much of your total token supply are you going to allocate to the fair launch? Probably not 100%. Savvy was targeting something closer to 20%. There are good arguments all sorts of different ways. The duration, I said, how long is it going to run? As few as 3 days, as long as 2 weeks. This one's interesting. The market cap, you kind of don't want to be too successful at the outset. You want an achievable market cap. The risk of doing too well is that you achieve the all-time high during the launch, and then the chart for your token is always below that high. So you don't exactly want to do too well. So it is possible, to keep in mind a market cap that's going to actually suit your protocol. And then, as I said, the start and the end weights of the LBP, there's a lot to say about. So when you choose those starting values, it has a really substantial effect on the way that the pool is going to unfold over time. Now, the price, this is just a normal sort of swap contract. So the way that it works is that the price is determined by how many tokens you have in the pool, how much reserve currency you have in the pool, and then the weights of those. So you can actually know at the very beginning exactly how much the starting price of this token is going to be, because you choose each of these. But what values do you choose? Well, you can look at historical data. There have been dozens, actually potentially hundreds of these already conducted that you can look at, but you can also look to simulations. And again, Balancer really is a thought leader in this space. They have a lot to say about using simulations. So the quintessential, the canonical way to do this is to go to the Balancer spreadsheet. And what you're trying to do is predict the performance of the LBP. This spreadsheet enables you to look at how the pool weights could potentially be changing over time and visualize what the effective token price is. And, you also kind of want to estimate how many tokens will be left at the end of the sale. And so if your goal is to distribute as broadly as possible, then you want as few left at the end as possible. Right. So, but maybe you have different goals, Yeah, hop in.
So here's a quick question for you. I realize that a lot of this is based on clear sort of on-chain metrics, but are there metrics for like how rugs relate to this?
That's interesting. I mean, so I don't have a big enough sample that I would go out on a limb and share what I would consider to be results. But I have looked at some projects that launched in this way, and they do kind of look like rugs to me. The way that I came to that determination really doesn't have to do with on-chain. It kind of ends up being a function of the Twitter, like the socials, basically. How's their Discord look? Like, what's the activity like? Mm-hmm. And so I couldn't really detect from the moment of the fair launch what was going to be a rug and what wasn't.
Right. That's the critical piece here. Is like even, a ton of people can be wrong.
That's right. Yeah.
Just because you're aping into some permissionless pool on LBP doesn't mean, just because it was curated by Reptile Presidente doesn't mean that it's actually like a profitable strategy.
No, it doesn't. And you say, on chain. Part of these launches, almost by design, there really isn't too much on-chain data about them, which is why I would point towards the socials. And in particular, I think you can learn a lot from Discord, from going to a protocol's Discord. That's a really strong signal for me what's likely to be a legitimate community, versus what's going to potentially be a rug. Yeah. On-chain signifiers, I think, are scarce because there's very little history to these protocols. When they're launching, it's the start. That's actually part of the what could make it fair is the idea that there is not there has been no previous distribution. What used to happen was VCs would get in on the seed round for a much lower price, and you would actually be able to see some of that activity on chain. You would see like X number of tokens are minted and then they're transferred, and you could get some indication that stuff was happening before in 2017, 2018 terms. That was the ICO era. The on-chain metrics would let you know that there was early access, and that didn't seem fair in some cases. So yeah, I think you raised something that's really challenging. I don't just simply due to the absence of a history, it's hard to tell from on-chain. So I look to other signals. Yeah. So, but yeah, good question. I mean, that's really what everybody wants to know.
Right.
So I say research Discord. That's how I do it. But yeah, so like I say, like this does have to do with ideas of fairness. It does have to do with not getting in early, giving preferential access to VCs and so on. It has to do with this idea of distributing the tokens broadly, potentially. You don't want that many left in the pool. And this spreadsheet, this simulator, it does give you some insight into how successful you're going to be at distributing the token. And one of the big outputs from the spreadsheet is the price curve. So I looked to a video by Jeffrey Bennett. He's from Balancer. He has an excellent video about this. He describes a flat price curve where the price is basically the same throughout, even though the weights are changing. If you can get a flat price curve, Bennett says that is kind of like the balance between the largest amount of reserve currency that ends up in the pool combined with the greatest distribution. But you can get different price curves. You can end up with a price curve where the token is extremely expensive at the start. And this ends up looking like a reverse auction, which works by setting the price above what anybody is willing to pay. And then you gradually lower the price until somebody finally jumps on it. So if you do a 99-1 pool where there's a teeny tiny bit of USDC and a ton of your tokens, then and you make the weights 99-1, the token could end up being extremely expensive, and like double digits in USDC, and but maybe a fair price is going to end up being closer to like $1. So it ends up being like 10x, 100x more than a reasonable price is. So then it takes a little while for the curve to get to a point where market participants are actually going to start purchasing the token. So it could be very expensive at the start. It could also be expensive at the end. And that might not be desirable because if the token price is rising and rising, it's an open market, and that might create pressure to sell. So if you get a flat curve, according to Balancer, that's really what you want. And so the spreadsheet can help you get some insight into how the LBP is likely to unfold over time. But there's one box in the spreadsheet that is really mysterious called token flow. And this is where everybody gets tripped up. So everybody goes to this spreadsheet. I mean, like I say, it's the canonical spreadsheet, but token flow is this one box, and it represents the number of tokens sold per time period. But how are you going to, this term is impossible to estimate. So it's known to be one of the most sensitive parameters in the whole spreadsheet, and what that means is if you make a teeny tiny difference in this number, that it can have big changes for the way that the entire sale is going to unfold. And, you could, you end up putting a number in there like 100,000, and what that means is, okay, every day you're going to sell 100,000 tokens. But what's that based on? Because you don't really have historical sales data for your own protocol. Maybe you can kind of do some guesswork there. This really depends on buying behavior, and that's really not something that's in this spreadsheet at all. So you're basically just guessing. So this is where we come in. This is where the current work actually starts pushing things forward. So I started working on applying agent-based modeling to this, and I wanted, the goal for this was to get the same results as the spreadsheet. We still wanted to look at the start and the end weights for the pool. We still wanted to look at the price curve. We wanted it to be easy to test a whole bunch of different parameters. But the spreadsheet wasn't getting it done. So this approach involves these little agents, so to speak. They're kind of like Sims, and they actually execute swaps against like a simulated balancer pool. And this ends up producing a model of demand. This is where this buying behavior kind of comes from. And what this means is that the number of tokens purchased per day becomes an output from the model instead of an input into the model. And this I think solves one of the biggest weaknesses of the balancer spreadsheet, is that you don't have to guess this number for how many tokens you're going to sell per day. Now we have some basis for it. It's based on the actual buying behavior of agents that are in this marketplace. So I want to talk a little bit more about actually doing this type of simulation, doing this LBP with agent-based modeling. So for starters, we need to create an environment for our simulation. This means we need an economy, and the economy has dimensions. It has a size. The aggregate wealth of all of the participants makes up this economy. And for it to be realistic, we need a couple of big accounts that are kind of be like whales, and lots of small accounts. And this happens to come from the real world. This type of distribution, this wealth distribution, it is called a Pareto distribution. And when you measure the wealth of individuals, you find, and when you plot that, you end up with this Pareto distribution. Well, you can run it in reverse to assign wealth to agents. And so that's what I do. I start with a Pareto distribution, and then I pull wealth measurements out of it. I'm just doing the exact opposite of what happens in real life. Our environment needs to have a pool, a liquidity pool that works like the real thing. And so for this Balancer, again, they've provided a Python model called Balancer v2 CAD. I have a link for this a little bit later in the talk. And this simulates a pool, but in Python, not in Solidly, and not on chain. This goes a lot faster. There's no crypto. There's nothing cryptographic about this. It's just Python. It doesn't have to be secure. It goes fast. And this enables these virtual agents to do virtual swaps against a virtual pool. And you also need to think about the time scale of everything. So this is, oh yeah, cool, thanks. In this case, we're thinking about 3 days. And then blockchains, they also have a notion of time. Blockchains go forward one block at a time. So the simulation kind of needs to sync these up. It needs to sync up the speed of the blockchain with the duration of the event. But once you get these together, now you have your environment. So let's talk about the agents that go into this environment. So I said they're kind of like Sims, or city skylines, or
about agents specifically. Agent GPT is now taken off entirely. And an agent is sort of a colloquial term for like a task. Are these type of agents that you're talking about? Can these be automated with GPT?
Yeah. So actually, we found a really fascinating paper just the other day involving language models in agents. So potentially yes. These, you can think of these as executing a task. The task that they do is they make swaps in the market, and that could actually be a kind of classic agent task. And it's kind of narrowly defined. Really, they're either just buying or they're selling. There is room for putting a language model into that, and making it a lot broader, basically. So these agents are kind of simple by comparison to a general purpose agent, but also I think in a lot of cases, the Chat GPT style agent, like Agent GPT, you kind of think of it as like an individual that you deputize with a task, and it goes off and it does it. In this situation, we're creating thousands of these agents. In, like I say, 2,000, maybe 3,000 agents, and part of what we want is lots of them. We want a crowd, and we're not giving each one individual directions. We give them capabilities, and they end up having some autonomy to make some of their own choices.
Yeah. If my
Hmm?
suggestion as the friendly dude in the room is, if you can pull your savvy agents and give them an API and give users access to them via Agent GPT, you will blow the roof off the thing.
Yeah. Actually, no, this is a really good point. I do need to see how I can bridge these across, because like I say, we saw some research just last week that
That
had
was
a
the
really
Sims
compelling
research,
use.
right? The Google and the
Let me think.
which research?
So it was out of Stanford, and there's a lot of overlap at Google there. Um, so how to describe it? They used a language model, and it was again thousands of simulated agents that they ended up planning activities like social events, like a Valentine's Day party, if that rings a bell. That was in the abstract.
Yeah, I remember this.
Um,
I'll put a link to it.
yeah, cool. I thought this was mind blowing, and I really like that work, and I think there's room for that. Like I say, the types of activities for this simulation are rather constrained. It's just they're going to buy or they're going to sell. But you could imagine some pretty sophisticated rules for why somebody makes the choice to buy versus the choice to sell. Um, and my background is in psychology, so these agents are actually driven by a kind of interesting psychological model that makes them not exactly deterministic, and they are influenced by their past decisions and stuff of that nature. But a human has a fantastically complicated set of rules for why we're going to buy versus why we're going to sell. And that's actually a place where a language model like GPT could actually do something like really revolutionary, in my estimation. I'm pretty sure that is the paper because it was archived in 2023. So cool. So actually, I mentioned this. The agents are not exactly predictable. They do have some randomness. So that comes in later. I'll call back to that randomness. It's actually very important that it's there. So, okay, we've got our environment for the agents, like kind of like a space for them to inhabit. We've got the agents themselves. What I'm showing here is what the model actually looks like, which this is kind of like a dashboard that displays some of the behaviors, the manifestations of the model as it runs over time. So we want to be measuring, for example, the price of the token over time. This relates to the price curve. We want to see the balance of the tokens in the pools and the token flow that's at the bottom of this graph. And we want to be able to set a whole bunch of parameters, like the number of agents and how much wealth they have, the number of tokens that are in the pool, the amount of, anyway, like the point is, this is most of what is in that spreadsheet, the very famous balancer spreadsheet. It's just remixed. It's a little different. Most of the same values are there, but what ends up happening is a little bit different. And so here's just, I ran it for just a little tiny bit, and we see that it's not a smooth line. These like the price jumps around a little bit. The balance in the pools, it's not a smooth curve. It goes up and down, and it's kind of cut off at the bottom. But you can see the token flow. It goes up and down. You can only see the very peaks of that curve down there, but it's a jagged line basically. And this is part of what makes this type of simulation very powerful compared to a spreadsheet approach, is that these are not smooth curves. These have interesting dynamics. They're called nonlinear dynamics. And it's extremely hard to affect this with a spreadsheet. But like I said, there's a random component to all of this, and so I'm going to explain how that is important in this slide. So we wanted to systematically look at a bunch of different start and end weights. We wanted to systematically look at a bunch of different economy sizes. What if this happened during a bull market? What if it happened at the very depths of a bear market? What if there were very wealthy participants? We also wanted to look at different token quantities. So these are all different parameters that we wanted to examine. And we also wanted to run the simulation a lot of times for every single combination of parameters. And the reason for that is the randomness. The randomness causes it to be different every single time that it's executed. So by running it a bunch of times, we end up with like a distribution of possible outcomes. In our case, a few hundred or a few thousand runs was probably sufficient. More complicated models, maybe you want more. But the point is, you do this, you run each of these possible inputs, you do all the combinations, you run each one a bunch of times, and then you just write everything to CSV, a comma separated value file. And so all those plots, like how many tokens are in the pool, stuff like that, you just log that to the CSV file because you're going to end up analyzing that later. But part of the challenge here is that this ends up being a really high dimensional data set. Every single input parameter happens to be a dimension. Everything that you're measuring is also a dimension. And everything is repeated multiple times because you run the study multiple times. And we humans are stuck in 3 dimensions, and going beyond that is complicated. It's possible maybe to get up to like 6 or 7 dimensions, but it's hard. And the common solution is to slice or pivot. These are again spreadsheet operations. You can quote unquote drill down into the data by looking at slices. But I'm going to show a different approach called a high plot, and it's just for arbitrary n-dimensional data. N-dimensional meaning like, however many dimensions you have, n dimensions. So the goal here is, well, there are a few goals. One thing is that we would like to find the inputs that are going to produce the outputs that we want. Like we want to distribute the tokens. So let's find out what the starting conditions are that enable us to distribute the tokens. And also, in a lot of cases, there's uncertainty. There are unknowns, and we would just like to be prepared for whatever is going to happen. So we can examine things, even things we don't think will happen. We can look at those starting conditions and get some insight into what might happen in different scenarios. So we got to listen to what the results are saying. Now, this is called a high plot. This is a high dimensional visualization. I'm pretty sure that this actually comes from Facebook research, but could be Google for all I know. But every column here is a dimension. So the one column is called tokens in pool, USDC in pool, the weight of the tokens start, the weight at the end, the economy size. Okay, so these were all boxes that I previously described as being inputs. These are all things that the balancer spreadsheet discusses. And then you have outputs, the token flow that I described, how many tokens are sold per time period, the final price in USD, and then the balance. How many tokens did you not distribute? And how much USD or reserve currency did you accumulate? How much swapped into the pool? And at the top here, we can see this is based on almost 29,000 runs of the simulation, 28,800 runs. So each line here, starting at the left, tracing through, represents one of these 28,000 runs. And it's colored based on, let's see, at this point, I think it's colored based on the amount of USDC in the pool. And so everywhere that it intersects one of the lines means that line used that parameter value. So you'd start here saying tokens in pool. This is 800,000, 600,000. So the line that goes from 600,000 to 2 million USDC in the pool to a token start weight of 0.9, like you basically like continue following it through, and eventually you end up at some outcomes in terms of token flow and balance of tokens and so on. And it's pretty hard to navigate the whole thing all at once, but luckily the interface permits you to draw subsets of some of the parameter values that you want to zoom in on. So let's say we really wanted to see what happens when there's 1 million USDC in the pool and when the economy size is 20 million. Like we really wanted to clamp those two values and see all the other possible sets of parameters and the likely outcomes. And so we see there's a pretty wide distribution for the token balance, a pretty narrow distribution for the USDC that's raised in the end, a pretty narrow distribution for the possible price range. So, you do actually get some insight into how things could potentially unfold with a certain set of input parameters. You can also run this instead of clamping the inputs, you can look at the outputs. Let's say that we only wanted to look at high raise of a lot of USDC, and we don't care about anything else. Let's say, and we want to see what the starting values are. So it's possible to run this in the opposite direction, where you start with the outputs and then you go back to try to find the inputs. So based off of all of this, I do have some findings, some observations that I wanted to share. So this comes from a lot of interviews with teams that ran LBPs and LGEs. We also ran a bunch of simulations ourselves. We did archival analysis of blockchain logs of LGEs, and there are four things that I want to talk a little bit about. So as far as liquidity generation goes, a little bit to say about the time course, a little bit to say about the wealth distribution, and regarding bootstrapping pools, a little bit to say about the economy size, and I'll also talk about the common start and end weights that we've come across. So the time course is people participate in a kind of burst of activity. There's a burst of activity at the beginning, burst of activity at the end, and depending on how the sale is set up, if there are any discounts or bonuses or kind of interesting devices like that, that it can drive activity at certain moments. Since the price will be the same for everyone at the end of the LGE, it means there's not really incentive to participate early, and there's not really a penalty for late participation. So that's part of why many of these sales include discounts for early participation to kind of offset that. And what ends up happening over the course of time is that as people participate, this kind of de-risks the whole thing. And we can see the participation. This becomes an on-chain metric. It can be visualized. We can see the allotments that are allocated through the contract, and this is kind of a form of social proof. We can see that other people are doing stuff, and that makes it a bit less risky. And so you frequently see a huge burst of activity at the very end. Let's see. So I saw a note saying the stream was having trouble. Is my audio still connected?
Your audio is good.
Good. Okay. Probably just some weird pop-up. Okay. Only a few slides left, actually. So if the internet kicks out, that's okay. I was talking about the Gini coefficient earlier. So we measured this for a bunch of LGEs. And like I said, when it's a value of 1, that's like an absolute monarchy, and a value of 0 is a completely even economy. And globally, the global economy is like 0.9 right now, which is that's kind of tilted towards an uneven distribution. And we found that the LGEs that we examined were more fair than the global economy,
Can
ranging
you
from
state
0.8
which
to 0.83.
IGEs those were?
Well,
Tokens.
since I've already mentioned Oath, so the Byte Masons Oath fair launch fit into this range, and it was we weren't sure what we were going to find. It could have discovered something extremely whale heavy, but we were happy to see that that this is better than the global economy, and so that's a little bit fair. That's one of the arguments that this is a fair thing. It's not as uneven as the global economy. It's a little fairer than that. So that's pretty nice. So another thing that we encountered, and this is mostly from the simulations, is that when there are whales, when the participants are a lot wealthier than the capitalization of the pool, it makes it easier for whales to influence the pool. A whale could execute a large purchase, and that would that would cause the pool to become imbalanced, and that could create the effect of the token being too expensive for normal people, normal participants. This is something that we were able to see with the agent-based model, but it's almost impossible to simulate with the spreadsheet. You can actually use the spreadsheet to induce kind of like one of these events, but it's a bit awkward. And so it's possible to mitigate this. And one of the ways is I've already described, like when you have a 99% starting weight, the token is extremely expensive at the start. And that actually does mitigate the ability of whales to do a huge purchase that's going to screw up the entire pool. Another mitigation that I haven't really seen anybody doing this, but again, Jeffrey Bennett describes emergency rebalancing of the pool. You can add and remove liquidity during the event, and that could potentially fix so-called damage from a whale. So that's possible, but I haven't seen that in practice. And then the last finding is okay. So I've seen a couple of patterns of what teams like to do. So they like to start at 99.1 and end at 50-50. So 50-50 is a classic Uniswap style constant product, AMM. And so this is very expensive at the start, and it does result in many hours of inactivity while the token is too expensive for anyone to really buy it. But by the end of the sale, the price is really set up very nicely for 50-50 AMM. So we've also seen starting at 90-10 and ending at 10-90, and this usually affects a slightly greater token distribution and results in a little bit more of the reserve currency being accrued. 90-10 ending at 50-50. All right, pretty much a permutation of the previous ones, but flatter curve, earlier participation is possible. We've also seen 70-30, 30-70. This is pretty flat. This is one of the ways to potentially max your distribution and your raise. But if you're undercapitalized, then whales could wreak havoc on your 70-30 pool. So some commonalities in the space. Okay, so let me just leave with some closing words. So what we talked about here, we talked about a fair method for launching these tokens, a so-called fair launch. The LGE, the liquidity generation event, all the tokens end up being the same price, basically. And then the liquidity bootstrapping pool, well, that is a price finding mechanism that has some kind of whale protection, some kind of bot protection. And so when you're going to plan a liquidity bootstrapping pool, it's important how you choose those starting parameters. And simulations can really help with this. So we, in particular, looked at agent-based modeling and created a realistic pool that with agents that executed swaps. It's just basically the real thing. We measure all the variables that we care about over time, and then we use a technique to explore the high-dimensional results. And a bunch of things that we found. Time course of the LGEs, we learned about the wealth distribution, we learned about the economy size, the wealth of the agents versus the capitalization of the pools, and some common start and end weights. So that's the whole thing at a high level. So if this was interesting to you, here's some contact info. I'm on GitHub, Twitter, email. I'm on Discord all the time, Savvy DeFi. I'm also a mod at MorphX on Phantom. And yeah, you can also find me on Calendly, schedule a time. I'll be happy to talk to you. Just get in touch. So I used a lot of stock photography throughout this talk. Got a reference for all of that. Here are some links. We did have a couple links dropped in the video throughout, but this is just for your reference, and you'll be able to get.
I'll add it to the video.
Perfect. And I'm going to make the PDF available in the near future. That'll be the link. And yeah, we're done. Thank you so much to the Avalanche Subnet Summit, and in particular, the really awesome, very dedicated organizers, the interview partners that we that helped us with this: Byte Mason's Oath, Camelot, Avalanche, Fjord Foundry, in particular, Savvy DeFi. I want to shout out Roman, Akshay, Alex, Ramsey, Tress Flames, Animal, Kingsley, Benjamin, all the others. And also to this audience, the synchronous audience, and then the virtual audience that's going to see this after the recording. And there's not much time left for questions, but I'll stop here.
Yeah, we can move over.
Open it up.
Go back to your Calendly link. I want to make sure people really hit you up.
Yeah, right on. Yeah. This is probably the slide to kind of leave it on. Here's my contact info. Yeah, that Twitter link, that's an underscore, OX_IDM, just so you know. It is what it is. Oh, cool. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. Okay, great. I've got a couple questions for you, actually.
Great.
Okay, so the obvious question in my mind is, okay, it's obvious that you have a very clear understanding of how to use what the existing fundraising models are out there and how to best actually simulate them. So well done, sir. Your brain is obviously a serious bench pressing this type of stuff. So
yeah, thanks.
It's serious. My question for you is, what did you guys learn from your experience, and how did you use it in the Savvy Fair launch?
Yeah, so we've done a bunch of things here. We did actually change some of the parameters that we went into this thinking. We would do certain distributions of tokens here, certain starting weights and certain ending weights, and we tweaked almost everything after doing some interviews and running the simulations. So we did actually put this into practice immediately. But some of what we haven't yet deployed is we have not yet run an LBP. We have not yet run the liquidity bootstrapping pool. So in this sense, we are prepared for a number of different scenarios, but none of them has unfolded yet, because it just hasn't happened yet. So I think a lot of what we were doing, apart from choosing the parameters, really what we were doing is getting prepared for possibilities, for unknown eventualities, that these are real-time events, and sometimes stuff gets hectic, and if you're not prepared, it can be stressful, the decision making and all that. So we do have some ideas ahead of time about, if we start seeing certain conditions, how might we respond to that? And a pretty practical example is that we don't know ahead of time how much the liquidity generation event is going to actually generate. But that's going to be directly tied to how much liquidity we can put into these pools. So that's why we simulated a whole bunch of different values, because once we know how much we've raised in step one, that determines what happens in step two. And I don't, there's only going to be 1 hour really between the two events. And so we don't have time. We need to do all the math ahead of time. So, so I would say that to answer your question, we did choose some values already, but also we're just, we're prepared for a whole bunch of things that haven't even happened yet.
So, meaning those events didn't take place, so therefore you rescheduled the event from 3/21 to a future event date based on market conditions.
Yeah. Well, and excuse me, a technical issue with one of the bridges, one of the AVAX bridges was down at the very start of the fair launch, and so network conditions were just, it could not have been worse, unfortunately. So so that's actually not even one of the conditions that I was referring to. That was kind of outside of the scope. I didn't simulate anything like pertaining to like validators going offline or something like that. That was really wild.
Yeah, that was a particular day when they upgraded the X chain from a DAG to a blockchain.
Exactly. Or yeah. No, they rolled out a client update, and just at the same time that we were launching, and it was not smooth. There was a hiccup in the network at that point. So so we did reschedule it for that reason. But even under the perfect conditions, we have a schedule where the liquidity generation event is going to run for X number of days, presumably about 10. And then we've just set aside 1 hour going from the liquidity generation event to the liquidity bootstrapping pool. So what I mean is we're planning ahead for that 1 hour of transition after the first event, but before the second event. We wanted to know all the parameters that we might possibly choose. Even before we go into the liquidity generation event, we wanted to know what we were going to do with the bootstrapping pool. And so so that's what I mean. In the timeline of the total fair launch, some of the unknown events, some of the future events are actually when everything goes perfect and according to plan. There are still future events that are unknowns, and so we're set up ahead of time to choose certain weights for the bootstrapping pool based on the amount of the raise and stuff like that.
Got it. Okay, those are mostly my questions. So, if there are questions from
Awesome.
Twitter or YouTube, happy to take them. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. This has been great. This will be I think this is a really great resource for a ton of people. You guys should probably pivot your business to just advising startups on this.
Yeah, like I say, we built a lot of the platform ourselves. So watch this space. You may see that. But thank you so much. Yes. It was a real pleasure. I love sharing this stuff, and I do hope it's valuable.
Oh
And
yeah, of
informative
course.
for everyone.
Thank you, IDM. I appreciate it greatly.
Yeah. No, it's my pleasure.
All right, man. Well, thank you. I look forward to having you guys back on during your next fair launch when we can provide you a little more hype.
Love it. Yeah, absolutely. No, we're looking for that. So yeah, we'll circle back. Absolutely.
Right. Thanks, IDM.
Awesome. Thank you so much.